I'm a big fan of Sega. I grew up playing all the classics on my Sega Genesis and Dreamcast, from Streets of Rage to Altered Beast, or the lesser-known stuff like Vector Man and the Bonanza Bros. I've enjoyed countless Sega franchises. And of course, one can't talk about Sega without mentioning Sonic, the company's biggest mascot. Though Sonic games have something of a spotty history, I've always really loved them. I played the first two Genesis titles endlessly, and I've beaten Sonic Adventure more than probably any other game. I mean, it hasn't exactly aged gracefully, but man, do I love that game. But that is a topic for another day. For today, we're talking about an oddity of a Sonic game. Now, I've played nearly every Sonic game, for better or for worse, but Sonic Shuffle, well, it is a different beast entirely. Released in November of 2000, Sonic Shuffle is, to put it bluntly, Mario Party, but Sonic. This idea itself isn't inherently bad, but it definitely puts certain expectations on the game's quality. Now, I was never particularly into Mario Party or other similar party games, as I was a very impatient child. I liked playing fast stuff, with the only real exceptions being RPGs. And since party games normally revolve around different players taking turns and running around a board, Mario Party and the like never quite hooked me like they did so many others. But somehow, this game was an exception. I mean, it still felt really slow compared to other games, but I think my childhood love of Sonic made it seem better. Whether it was or not is an entirely different question. Which brings us to the review. Seeing as I'm prone to finding the positive aspects of games, how does Sonic Shuffle fare? Is it a decent Mario Party clone? Or an unfortunate piece of Sega history that's much better left in the past? Let's find out. Alright, so Sonic Shuffle. This game has a story mode that's entirely separate from the rest of the Sonic games. Not that Sonic games have a particularly cohesive sense of continuity to begin with, but you can definitely tell that this game's story is different. So Sonic and his friends stumble upon somewhere called Imaginary World, which is imaginary without an I. In this magical place are two fairy things named Lumina and Void. Lumina, if you couldn't tell, is the nice fairy. Void, on the other hand, is the mean fairy. Each of them represents a different type of feeling, positive or negative, that lets others dream. So they're kind of reminiscent of Knights and Riala from the Knights franchise. Lumina is the protector of the Precious Stone, which, as the name implies, is a rather precious stone, made up of everyone's dreams. Void manages to touch the stone, shattering it into 5 pieces. Those pieces fly into the game's 5 main boards: Emerald Coast, Firebird, Nature Zone, Riot Train, and 4th Dimension Space. So, it's up to Sonic and pals to find the pieces of the Precious Stone, put it back together, and have a merry old time. Eventually, the plot goes deeper into the story of Lumina and Void, which leads to a thorough examination of the duality of man and the consequences of giving in to one's base nature. Actually, they're two halves of one fairy named Illumina, who created and protected the Precious Stone until she began to have self-doubts, which split her in two, forming Lumina and Void. That's pretty in-depth for a party game. I mean, it's not Metal Gear Solid, but for a party game, that's a decent amount of plot, even if it's all kinds of abstract. The bad part about the story is that it's presented in some brutal cutscenes, with some delightfully awkward dialogue. As far as quality, it's alright. It's somewhat basic and doesn't actually involve Sonic's crew in any major capacity outside of gameplay and some clunky dialogue, but it serves its purpose pretty well. And to be fair, I can't expect too much of a narrative from a genre that has Shrek Super Party and the Muppets Party Cruise under its belt. Alright, so that covers the story. So on to the gameplay. So the game functions in the same way that most party games do. Replace a die with a numbered card ranging from 1 to S, and traverse a themed board to collect currency and shiny objects. There are also Eggman cards, which make Eggman appear and do terrible things to you. Every space on the board has some form of effect, whether it's gaining or losing rings, or riding a dolphin across the sea. This is a very odd game. There are even battle spaces where you can fight a dolphin on ice skates, or a palm tree with a face. Basically, each enemy has a numbered card, and you've got to use a higher card, combined with an unnecessary roulette system, to defeat them. Defeating an enemy gives you a stone thing, which can do anything from discarding certain cards to switching places with others on the board when used. The battles are a cool idea, but if you run into one without any decently high cards, you'll probably lose, and as a result of that, you'll lose a card and rings, and depending on the battle, you may even lose the following turn. And all of this depends on your timing and pressing a button. Not only do you need to pick a card equal to or higher than your opponent's, but you need to stop the card from spinning around at the speed of sound at the proper number. It just makes battles needlessly complicated and difficult. Moving on, the board also has exclamation point spaces, which either put you in a minigame or a mini-event. Minigames are exactly what they sound like. A large amount of them are actually pretty fun, even if a few of them are pretty obvious Mario Party copies and some of them don't make a whole lot of sense. Events, on the other hand, are the definition of insanity. A seemingly random and surreal event will occur, ranging from participating on an Eggman game show to seeing a bird fly away with a weird message. You're then normally given a choice, which can have an objective answer, such as when Eggman asks you what place you're in, or how many times you've landed on a ring space, or a completely random answer, like when you pick between 3 cups all Indiana Jones style and pray to every deity that you get rings instead of some horrid fate. So events are a mixed bag. They're a cool concept as it provides an interesting and kind of unique diversion, but the fact that it's a seemingly random way for more horrible things to happen to you is a somewhat substantial drawback. Oh, and then there are accidents, which are either transitions to new stages or random and insane minigames. You're running along, playing the game normally, and suddenly you're thrown into some crazy minigame where you can easily lose everything with no prior instruction or warning because Knuckles is a miserable little goblin! God, I need a break. Anyways, back to the game's card system, which is actually pretty unique, as the cards are used both in movement and combat. This is both good and bad, however. The card system is kind of a nice change from the average dice system, which utilizes the Dreamcast's VMU in a really interesting way. When playing versus mode with human players, your card values only appear on the VMU screen so that your opponent can't see them. That's pretty neat, even if it's incredibly minor. The bad part of the card system is that one of the game's main mechanics is the ability to use other people's cards, even though you can't see what they are. Which leads me to the biggest complaint I've got for Sonic Shuffle. This game is hard, like unfairly hard. The game's difficulty is endlessly frustrating. Any form of AI players know every move you'll make, and know every card you have. The AI will steal more from you than a WestJet phone scam. Does that happen outside of Canada? Does that joke work? The AI knows your best cards and will happily seize them at any given moment. It's infuriating at times, as you'll be doing pretty well, and suddenly, bang! Everything you hold dear, snatched away, never to be seen again! Until it's used against you. Hooray. Seriously though, I have never seen AI this malevolent. I have no idea as to how I didn't remember this game's ridiculous difficulty. I must have been seriously distracted by my Sonic fanboyism, because good lord, this game is tough. Anyways, so you run around trying to get pieces of the Precious Stone. Unfortunately, the Precious Stone pieces are guarded by bosses, which means you have to partake in more weirdly designed combat. The bosses look kinda cool though, so that's a plus. Another major downside is that bosses, as well as battles, minigames, events, and even the occasional turn, require a metric ton of loading. This does, however, mean that you get to hear that explosive and simultaneously nostalgic Dreamcast loading sound. Meanwhile, collecting rings is a journey in and of itself. Rings collected in story mode are used to purchase stuff in the Sonic Room, which, as the name suggests, is a room with Sonic staring at you. Alright. Sometimes other characters walk by and do backflips and stuff. Alright. Sonic Shuffle. So you try to collect rings, which is difficult since it's really easy to lose rings. Lose a battle, lose rings. Land on a red space, lose rings. Lose to a boss, lose rings. Land on a bigger red space that Eggman made because you were a little too close to having a meager amount of rings from tirelessly collecting them in the futile hope of unlocking something at some point? Lose rings. Okay, actually one of the funniest parts of this game is another way to lose rings. When someone gets a precious stone shard, Eggman shows up and drops a 16-ton anvil on the player farthest from the stone. Then he just bails. Sometimes he even hits the wrong person for some reason. I am not sure where that PhD is from. I mean, defeating Sonic can't be that hard if he can just teleport above him and drop an anvil on his head. It just puts the other games into perspective. Anyway, so if you can get a decent amount of rings at the end of a level, you can use them to buy photos from the Sonic Room photo album. These photos do anything from unlocking characters and features to just being viewable screenshots. The extra characters are Super Sonic, a Chow, Big the Cat, and my personal favorite character, E102 Gamma. Just seeing Gamma makes me sad. Getting these characters costs a nearly unfair amount of rings though, and since obtaining rings is such a daunting task, I suggest just buying photo number 49, which unlocks the toy box. In the toy box, you can replay any minigames you've encountered in the story, and for some reason, you can play as the secret characters in it. So if you don't want to play a ton of the story mode, it's a quick way to play as all the other characters. As for visuals, this game looks pretty nice for a Dreamcast game. I love the style that Dreamcast games, or at least Sega games on the Dreamcast, tended to have. The vibrant colors and diverse environments add a great deal to the game, or at least to its visual appeal. Each main board has a unique theme and aesthetic to it, whether it's the beach and ice-themed Emerald Coast, or the explosive flaming airship, the Firebird. The boards are all different enough to keep them from getting boring, which somewhat soothes your pain as the AI viciously eviscerates you. On the other hand, there's a fair amount of weird Dreamcast mouth movement. It's kinda charming in a silly way, but it's still a bit distracting. Like I said earlier, the designs for the enemies and bosses are definitely creative, which is entertaining in its own way. The minigames look alright as well. Some of the levels have a pretty cool look to them. Nonetheless, Sonic Shuffle looks alright for the most part. The game's sound is probably the best part of Sonic Shuffle. I know there's a lot of opinions about this, since the music is pretty all over the board with all kinds of wild tracks, but I really like it. It's got that weird Dreamcast sound to it. Do I sound like a Dreamcast fanboy yet? Random words put into vibey songs. It doesn't get much more nostalgic than that for me. There are a ton of songs too. Each has its own distinct feeling, and they range from relaxing and comforting to incredibly unsettling and eerie, or just plain weird. There's a lot of diversity in the soundtrack, which is why it's such a thoroughly enjoyable part of the game. Okay, so what's my final opinion on Sonic Shuffle? Well, that's a completely reasonable question. This review has gone back and forth. This game is made up of some horrible things and some pretty neat things. Positives and negatives all over the place. And though I do like to find the good parts in any game, I can also tell when a game isn't great. It's important to be somewhat objective when reviewing something, even while maintaining an already negative or positive attitude. Like I said before, Sonic Shuffle has some cool stuff in it. The problem is that a lot of its ideas, while neat in concept, are executed poorly. Mini events, the card system, and the concept of battles are all alright ideas. Their potential is just never fully realized. And then there are some pretty universally bad things, like long load times, insane AI, and unnecessarily difficult unlockables. So overall, Sonic Shuffle isn't particularly good. It's not as fun as I remember, but the music and levels are really great, and the story is unique for a party game. So while it's not a great game, it does have some decent elements. I can't really recommend it to anyone who didn't grow up with it, or wants to have some masochistic fun with friends, but I definitely recommend checking out the soundtrack. And that's Sonic Shuffle. It's definitely an odd one, but hey, it's a weird piece of Sonic and Sega history, and one that I think was worth taking another look at. Hey, thanks for watching! If you want to see some of my other stuff, you can click here, here, or here. Otherwise, stick around and I'm sure you'll see more things like this. So, see you around.